It lasted 14 days. 14 days that changed the balance of power between America and Russia forever. Vladimir Putin had just ordered the most audacious assassination attempt on American soil since the Cold War, targeting the FBI director himself. But Putin made one critical miscalculation. He thought Kash Patel was just another Washington bureaucrat who would fold under pressure. Instead, he discovered that America's top law enforcement officer was about to teach the Kremlin a lesson they would never forget. You don't threaten American institutions and walk away unscathed. November 15, 2025, FBI headquarters. Washington, D.C. Director Kash Patel was reviewing intelligence reports when his secure phone rang with the call that would define his career. Deputy Director Dan Bongino's voice was unusually tense. "Kash, we have a problem. NSA intercepted communications from Moscow. Putin has greenlit an operation against you personally." For most people, learning that the Russian president had ordered their assassination would be terrifying. For Kash Patel, it was confirmation that the FBI was finally hitting its targets hard enough to make Putin desperate. But here's what nobody knew yet. This wasn't just about eliminating one FBI director. Putin's assassination order was part of a larger operation called Beheading the Snake, a systematic plan to eliminate key American intelligence officials who had been disrupting Russian operations worldwide. Patel had been marked for death not because of what he might do in the future, but because of what he had already accomplished in dismantling Putin's spy networks across America. And Putin was about to learn that attacking the FBI director was the biggest mistake of his political career. The intelligence was devastating in its specificity. According to NSA intercepts, Putin had personally approved a three-phase operation. Phase 1 involved psychological warfare designed to isolate Patel from his allies and destroy his credibility. Phase 2 called for direct intimidation through threats against his family and associates. Phase 3, if the first two failed, authorized lethal action against the FBI director using plausibly deniable methods that could be attributed to domestic extremists or foreign terrorists. What made this intelligence particularly chilling was its source. It came from deep inside the Kremlin itself, from assets that the CIA had been cultivating for years. The intercepts included actual recordings of Putin discussing the operation with his intelligence chief. "The American FBI director has become a serious problem," Putin's voice was clear on the recordings. "He understands our methods better than his predecessors. He must be neutralized before he causes irreparable damage to our operations." But Putin had made a fundamental error in targeting Kash Patel. Unlike previous FBI directors who came from traditional law enforcement or legal backgrounds, Patel had spent years in national security and intelligence work. He understood how foreign adversaries operated, and more importantly, he knew how to fight back using methods that previous FBI directors had never contemplated. Putin was about to discover that he had picked a fight with someone who understood the intelligence game better than any FBI director in history. The first phase of Putin's operation began within hours of the NSA intercept. Suddenly, American and European media outlets began publishing stories questioning Patel's fitness for office, his mental stability, and his supposed obsession with Russia. The articles were too coordinated to be coincidental. They appeared simultaneously across multiple countries, used similar language, and cited anonymous sources with remarkably consistent talking points. But Patel recognized the campaign immediately. During his time at the National Security Council, he had seen Russian disinformation operations up close. The pattern was unmistakable: plant stories in fringe publications, amplify them through social media bots, then watch as mainstream outlets picked up the narrative. Within 48 hours, major newspapers were running editorials questioning whether Patel's anti-Russian paranoia was compromising American law enforcement. The psychological warfare intensified when several former intelligence officials, people who had never publicly criticized Patel before, suddenly appeared on television questioning his judgment. These weren't random critics. They were carefully selected voices that Putin's operatives knew would carry weight with American audiences. The message was consistent. Patel was unstable, obsessed with Russia, and dangerous to American institutions. But Putin's operatives had misjudged their target. Instead of being intimidated by the media campaign, Patel used it as intelligence. Every article, every television appearance, Every social media post was analyzed by FBI counterintelligence team. Within 72 hours, the Bureau had mapped the entire disinformation network, tracing financial flows, identifying key amplifiers, and documenting the coordination between Russian intelligence and their American asset. "They're not trying to destroy my reputation," Patel told his senior staff during a classified briefing. "They're exposing their entire influence network. Every person who amplifies these stories without independent verification is either a useful idiot or an active asset. Either way, they're giving us intelligence about how Russia operates in America." The second phase of Putin's operation began on November 20th, when Patel's security detail detected surveillance around his home, his office, and his family members. The surveillance was professional but deliberately visible, designed to create psychological pressure rather than gather intelligence. Russian operatives wanted Patel to know he was being watched, wanted him to feel vulnerable, wanted him to understand that Putin could reach him anywhere. But once again, Putin had miscalculated. Patel didn't retreat into a bunker or request additional security. Instead, he turned the surveillance into a counterintelligence operation. FBI teams began documenting every Russian operative involved in the surveillance, tracing their movements, identifying their safe houses, and mapping their communication networks. What Putin intended as intimidation became the largest counterintelligence breakthrough against Russian operations in decades. The breakthrough came when FBI surveillance teams followed Russian operatives to a warehouse in Virginia that turned out to be a major intelligence hub. Inside, agents discovered communications equipment, false documentation facilities, and detailed files on dozens of American officials. But the real prize was a server containing encrypted communications between Russian intelligence and their American assets. Communications that would expose the largest Russian spy ring in American history. Putin made a critical error, Patel explained to President Trump during a classified briefing. He assumed that threatening me would make me back down. Instead, he gave us the opportunity to roll up his entire network. Every move they make against me exposes another piece of their operation. The intelligence haul was staggering. The FBI discovered that Russian operatives had been conducting surveillance on hundreds of American officials, not just Patel. They had detailed files on senators, congressmen, judges, and business leaders. They had been planning multiple assassination operations, not just against the FBI director. Putin's obsession with eliminating Patel had led him to expose the scope of Russian intelligence operations across the entire American government. But the most shocking discovery was the extent of Russian penetration into American institutions. The server contained evidence that Russian intelligence had recruited assets inside major corporations, universities, think tanks, and even government agencies. The operation went far beyond traditional espionage. It was a systematic attempt to infiltrate and control American decision-making at every level. Phase 3 of Putin's operation began on November 25th, when intelligence intercepts revealed that Moscow had authorized lethal action against Patel. The assassination was to be carried out by a Chechen operative who had entered the United States on a student visa 6 months earlier. The plan involved a car bombing designed to look like domestic terrorism, with evidence planted to suggest the attack came from American extremists opposed to federal law enforcement. But by this point, Patel was 10 steps ahead of Putin's operatives. The FBI had been tracking the Chechen operative since he entered the country, monitoring his movements, documenting his contacts, and gathering evidence of his mission. Instead of arresting him immediately, Patel authorized a controlled operation that would allow the Bureau to capture the entire assassination network. The operation, codenamed Matryoshka after Russian nesting dolls, was a masterpiece of counterintelligence work. FBI teams allowed the Russian operative to proceed with his mission while ensuring that Patel was never actually in danger. Every step of the assassination plot was monitored, recorded, and documented. When the operative finally attempted to plant the car bomb, he found himself surrounded by FBI agents who had been watching him for months. But Patel wasn't satisfied with just stopping the assassination. He wanted to send Putin a message that would resonate through the Kremlin for years to come. Within hours of capturing the would-be assassin, the FBI began a coordinated takedown of Russian intelligence operations across America. Safe houses were raided, operatives were arrested, and assets were rolled up in what became the largest expulsion of Russian intelligence personnel since the Cold War. The psychological impact on Putin was immediate and devastating. In recorded conversations intercepted by American intelligence, the Russian president was heard saying, "How did they know? How did the American FBI predict every move we made?" Putin had spent decades building intelligence networks in America, and Kash Patel had dismantled them in 2 weeks. But the FBI director wasn't finished. On December 1st, he held a press conference that sent shockwaves through Moscow and Washington alike. Standing before cameras with evidence spread across tables behind him, Patel methodically outlined Putin's assassination plot, the disinformation campaign, and the broader Russian intelligence operation. For too long, Vladimir Putin has treated America like his personal playground. Patel announced, "He has assassinated dissidents on our soil, interfered in our elections, and now attempted to murder American officials." Today, that ends. The evidence Patel presented was overwhelming and undeniable. Recorded conversations between Putin and his intelligence chiefs discussing the assassination, financial records showing payments to operatives, surveillance footage of Russian spies conducting reconnaissance, communications intercepts proving the coordination of disinformation campaigns. It was the most complete exposure of Russian intelligence operations in American history. But the real shock came with Patel's final revelation. "We didn't just stop this assassination attempt. We used it to map and dismantle Putin's entire intelligence network in America." Over the past 2 weeks, FBI agents have arrested 47 Russian operatives, expelled 23 diplomatic personnel, and seized assets worth $2.3 billion. Vladimir Putin's American spy network no longer exists. The numbers were staggering, but the psychological impact was even greater. Putin had ordered the assassination of the FBI director and instead had lost his entire intelligence apparatus in America. It was the most catastrophic intelligence failure in Russian history, and it had been orchestrated by the very man Putin had tried to kill. The international reaction was swift and decisive. NATO allies, who had been frustrated by Russian intelligence operations in their own countries, immediately began requesting American assistance in identifying and expelling Russian operatives. The European Union imposed additional sanctions on Russia's intelligence services. Even countries that had maintained neutral relations with Moscow began reconsidering their positions. But perhaps most damaging was the reaction within Russia itself. Intelligence intercepts revealed that Putin was furious with his intelligence chiefs, blaming them for the catastrophic failure. Several high-ranking officials were reportedly arrested or dismissed. The SVR, Russia's foreign intelligence service, was essentially paralyzed as Putin conducted a purge of personnel he suspected of incompetence or disloyalty. Putin's greatest strength has always been his intelligence services. Patel explained during a classified congressional briefing, "By targeting me, he gave us the opportunity to destroy that strength." Russia's ability to conduct intelligence operations against America has been set back by decades. The strategic implications were enormous. Russia had spent 30 years rebuilding its intelligence capabilities after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Putin had personally overseen the development of networks that penetrated American government, business, and society. In 2 weeks, Kash Patel had undone 3 decades of Russian intelligence work, but the FBI director wasn't content with defensive success. He wanted to ensure that Putin understood the consequences of threatening American officials. On December 10th, Patel authorized the most audacious counterintelligence operation in FBI history, a direct attack on Russian intelligence operations worldwide. Using intelligence gathered from the dismantled American network, FBI teams began sharing information with allied services about Russian operations in their countries. Within days, Russian operatives were being arrested in London, Paris, Berlin, and Tokyo. The network that Putin had used to project power globally was being systematically destroyed by the FBI director he had tried to assassinate. The operation expanded beyond traditional intelligence work. FBI cyber teams working with NSA assets began disrupting Russian communications networks and exposing Russian operations online. Social media accounts used for disinformation were identified and banned. Websites spreading Russian propaganda were taken offline. The digital infrastructure that supported Russian influence operations was systematically dismantled. But Patel's most devastating blow against Putin was psychological. On December 15th, exactly 1 month after Putin had ordered his assassination, Patel released a personal video message directed at the Russian president. Speaking directly into the camera, with the American flag prominent behind him, Patel delivered a message that would be viewed millions of times around the world. "Vladimir Putin, you made a mistake," Patel said, his voice calm but filled with authority. "You thought you could intimidate American law enforcement by threatening to kill me. Instead, you showed the world exactly how desperate and weak you've become. Your intelligence networks are gone. Your operatives are in prison. Your influence operations have been exposed and dismantled." The video continued, but more importantly, "You've reminded the American people why we need strong institutions that can't be intimidated by foreign tyrants. You've united our country against Russian interference. You've given us the justification to dismantle every Russian operation we can find. You thought targeting one FBI director would weaken American law enforcement. Instead, you've made it stronger than ever." The psychological warfare was deliberate and devastating. By addressing Putin directly, Patel was demonstrating that American officials weren't afraid of Russian threat. By cataloging Putin's failures, he was undermining the Russian president's reputation for strategic brilliance. By promising continued action against Russian operations, he was ensuring that Putin would spend years looking over his shoulder. The video went viral not just in America but around the world. It was translated into dozens of languages and shared millions of times on social media platforms that Russian censors couldn't control. For the first time in years, an American official had publicly confronted Putin and emerged victorious. The psychological impact resonated far beyond intelligence circles. But Putin wasn't finished. Humiliated by the failure of his assassination plot and the destruction of his American networks, the Russian president authorized increasingly desperate measures. Russian hackers launched cyber attacks against American infrastructure. Russian media began spreading disinformation about American officials. Russian diplomats made veiled threats about consequences for American actions. Each escalation gave Patel additional justification for expanding his operations against Russian interests. Cyber attacks were traced back to their sources and neutralized. Disinformation campaigns were exposed and discredited. Diplomatic threats were answered with additional sanctions and expulsions. Putin's desperation was only making his situation worse. The culmination came on December 20th, when intercepted communications revealed that Putin was considering more extreme measures, potentially including attacks on American facilities overseas, or cyber warfare against American critical infrastructure. It was at this point that Patel decided to end the escalation with a demonstration of American power that Putin would never forget. Working with the CIA, NSA and military intelligence, Patel coordinated the most comprehensive intelligence operation against Russia since the Cold War. In a single 48-hour period, Russian intelligence operations in 47 countries were simultaneously exposed and dismantled. Operatives were arrested, safe houses were raided, and communications networks were destroyed on 6 continents. The operation, codenamed Global Sweep, was a masterpiece of international coordination. Every major intelligence service in the NATO alliance participated, along with partners in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. The simultaneous nature of the raids prevented Russian operatives from warning each other or destroying evidence. Within 2 days, Russia's global intelligence apparatus had been effectively neutralized. Putin's reaction was captured in NSA intercepts that would later be declassified. The Russian president was heard screaming at his intelligence chiefs, "How is this possible? How did one American FBI director destroy 30 years of work in 30 days?" The answer was simple but devastating. Putin had picked a fight with someone who understood intelligence warfare better than he did. The international media coverage was unprecedented. Every major news organization in the world covered the story of how Putin's assassination plot had backfired spectacularly. The narrative was consistent across different countries and political perspectives. The Russian president had underestimated American capabilities and paid a devastating price for his miscalculation. But perhaps the most satisfying moment for Patel came on December 25th. When intelligence intercepts revealed Putin meeting with his Security Council to discuss the American problem. The Russian president, who had spent decades projecting strength and strategic brilliance, was reduced to complaining about one FBI director who had systematically destroyed his life's work. "The American Patel has become our greatest enemy," Putin was heard saying. "He understands our method. He anticipates our moves. He has turned our own tactics against us. We must assume that every Russian operation worldwide has been compromised." It was a remarkable admission from a leader who had built his reputation on intelligence and strategic thinking. Putin was essentially acknowledging that Kash Patel had outmaneuvered him completely, turning an assassination plot into the greatest counterintelligence victory in American history. The long-term strategic implications were enormous. Russia's ability to conduct intelligence operations had been crippled for years, perhaps decades. Putin's reputation for strategic brilliance had been destroyed. Russian influence operations worldwide had been exposed and dismantled. The balance of power in the intelligence war between America and Russia had shifted decisively in America's favor. But Patel understood that victory in intelligence warfare requires consolidation, not just success. Over the following months, the FBI worked with international partners to ensure that Russian intelligence capabilities couldn't be quickly rebuilt. New monitoring systems were established. Enhanced cooperation agreements were signed with allied services. Legal frameworks were created to prevent Russian operatives from easily re-establishing their networks. By March 2026, intelligence assessments concluded that Russian intelligence capabilities had been reduced to their lowest level since the Putin's assassination plot had not just failed. It had achieved the exact opposite of its intended effect, strengthening American intelligence capabilities while devastating Russian operations worldwide. The political impact in both countries was profound. In America, Patel became a national hero, praised by politicians from both parties for his handling of the Russian threat. His approval ratings soared to levels rarely seen for FBI directors. Congress increased FBI funding and expanded the Bureau's authorities for counterintelligence operations. In Russia, Putin faced the most serious political crisis of his presidency. Intelligence intercepts revealed growing dissatisfaction within the Russian security apparatus, with officials questioning Putin's strategic judgment and leadership ability. For the first time in years, Putin appeared vulnerable to internal challenges. The psychological warfare continued as Patel regularly released updates on Russian intelligence failures, keeping the story in international headlines and maintaining pressure on Putin's regime. Each revelation further undermined Russian credibility and demonstrated American intelligence superiority. But perhaps the most important long-term consequence was the deterrent effect on other foreign adversaries. China, Iran, and North Korea all received a clear message. Attacking American intelligence officials would result in the systematic destruction of their own intelligence operations. The Patel Doctrine became shorthand for aggressive counterintelligence responses to foreign threats. 1 year after Putin's failed assassination plot, Patel reflected on the experience during a speech to FBI agents. Vladimir Putin thought he could intimidate America by threatening to kill one FBI director. Instead, he reminded us why strong institutions and brave individuals can overcome any foreign threat. He wanted to weaken American law enforcement. He ended up making it stronger than ever. The speech was broadcast worldwide and viewed as a capstone to one of the most successful counterintelligence operations in American history. Putin, who had once been feared as a master strategist, had been reduced to a cautionary tale about the dangers of underestimating American resolve and capabilities. Today, when intelligence professionals study successful counterintelligence operations, the Putin assassination plot is taught as a masterclass in turning enemy actions against themselves. Business schools analyze Patel's strategic thinking, military academies study his operational planning, political science students learn about the importance of institutional strength in confronting foreign threats. But perhaps the most important lesson is simpler. Sometimes the best response to intimidation is not defensive protection, but offensive action that eliminates the source of the threat. Putin tried to eliminate Kash Patel and ended up eliminating his own intelligence capabilities instead. The failed assassination plot became a defining moment not just for Patel's career, but for American intelligence operations in the 21st century. It proved that American institutions, when properly led and resourced, could outmatch any foreign adversary. It demonstrated that attacking American officials carries consequences far beyond what foreign leaders might expect. And it established a new standard for American responses to foreign threats. Swift, comprehensive, and devastating. Putin had wanted to send a message about Russian power. Instead, he received a masterclass in American strength. The hunter had become the hunted, and the lesson would resonate through intelligence services worldwide for decades to come. The psychological warfare between Patel and Putin continued throughout 2026, but the outcome was never in doubt. Every Russian attempt to rebuild their intelligence capabilities was quickly detected and dismantled by American and allied services. Putin had lost more than just operational assets. He had lost the element of surprise that is essential to intelligence work. By summer 2026, intercepted communications revealed the full extent of Putin's desperation. The Russian president was heard telling his Security Council, "We cannot operate anywhere without the Americans knowing. They have penetrated every level of our operation. This Patel has destroyed everything we built since the Soviet collapse." The admission was both remarkable and pathetic. Putin, who had spent decades building a reputation as a master spy, was reduced to complaining about being outmaneuvered by an American FBI director. The hunter had become the hunted, and everyone in international intelligence circles knew it. But Patel wasn't satisfied with just defensive victories. Throughout 2026, he continued releasing carefully selected intelligence about Russian operations, keeping the story in international headlines and maintaining pressure on Putin's regime. Each revelation served multiple purposes. It demonstrated American intelligence capabilities, discouraged other nations from cooperating with Russia, and reminded Putin that his failures were permanent. The releases were strategically timed for maximum psychological impact. On the anniversary of Putin's assassination order, Patel released previously classified recordings of Putin discussing the plot with his intelligence chiefs. On Putin's birthday, American intelligence revealed details of additional Russian operations that had been disrupted. On Russian national holidays, new evidence of Russian intelligence failures was made public. The constant stream of revelations had a devastating effect on Russian morale and Putin's standing within his own government. Intelligence intercepts showed growing dissatisfaction among Russian security officials, with some openly questioning Putin's leadership and strategic judgment. For the first time since taking power, Putin appeared vulnerable to internal challenges. The international community took notice of this vulnerability. European leaders who had been cautious about confronting Putin directly began taking harder lines on Russian aggression. Asian allies increased their cooperation with American intelligence services. Even traditionally neutral countries began sharing information about Russian operations on their territory. China, Russia's most important strategic partner, began distancing itself from Russian intelligence operations. Chinese officials privately expressed concerns about Russian incompetence and strategic failures that might compromise Chinese interests. The partnership that Putin had cultivated as a counterweight to American power was fracturing under the pressure of his intelligence disaster. The economic consequences for Russia were equally severe. International investors, already wary of Russian instability, began pulling money out of Russian markets at accelerated rates. Sanctions imposed after the failed assassination plot were expanded as more countries joined the American-led coalition against Russian intelligence operations. Russia's economy, already struggling under existing sanctions, faced additional pressure as its intelligence failures undermined confidence in Putin's leadership. But perhaps the most damaging long-term consequence was the destruction of Russia's soft power. its ability to influence international opinion through propaganda and disinformation. The exposure of Russian influence operations had made media outlets, social media platforms, and government officials worldwide more aware of Russian manipulation tactics. What had once been subtle influence campaigns became obvious propaganda efforts that were quickly identified and countered. Academic institutions, think tanks, and cultural organizations that had unknowingly amplified Russian messaging began implementing new procedures to identify and reject Russian influence attempts. The network of useful idiots that Russia had cultivated over decades was essentially neutralized as organizations became more sophisticated about recognizing foreign manipulation. Social media platforms, pressured by evidence of Russian disinformation campaigns, implemented new algorithms and policies specifically designed to identify and suppress Russian propaganda. The digital infrastructure that had allowed Russia to influence American and European public opinion was systematically dismantled. Russian diplomatic missions around the world found themselves under increased scrutiny as host countries began more carefully monitoring Russian activities. Diplomatic immunity, which had been used to shield intelligence operations, became less effective as countries implemented new restrictions and monitoring procedures. By early 2027, intelligence assessments concluded that Russian intelligence capabilities had been reduced to their lowest level since the 1940s. The SVR, once feared throughout the intelligence community, was essentially operating blind in most countries. The GRU, Russia's military intelligence service, had lost most of its overseas capabilities. Putin's personal intelligence network, built over 3 decades, had been completely dismantled. The strategic implications for global security were profound. Russia's ability to support proxy conflicts, influence elections, or conduct sophisticated disinformation campaigns had been severely compromised. Authoritarian regimes worldwide that had relied on Russian expertise and support found themselves increasingly isolated and vulnerable. Putin's failures also had consequences for other American adversaries. China, Iran, and North Korea all received clear messages about the costs of directly threatening American officials. The Patel Doctrine became an established principle of American counterintelligence. Attacks on American institutions would result in the systematic destruction of adversary capabilities. The Chinese government in particular began reassessing its own intelligence operations against America. Intercepted communications showed Chinese officials discussing the American FBI capabilities and the need to avoid Putin's mistakes. The deterrent effect of Patel's success extended far beyond Russian operations. Iranian intelligence services, which had been considering operations against American officials, quietly shelved their plans after reviewing the destruction of Russian capabilities. North Korean operatives, previously bold in their activities against American interests, became noticeably more cautious in their operations. The success also transformed American intelligence operations worldwide. The FBI's counterintelligence budget was increased dramatically as Congress recognized the effectiveness of Patel's approach. New authorities were granted for offensive counterintelligence operations. Training programs were expanded to prepare agents for the new era of intelligence warfare. Allied intelligence services began requesting American assistance in identifying and neutralizing foreign operations in their own countries. The American model of aggressive counterintelligence became the standard approach for democratic nations facing authoritarian threat. But perhaps the most important long-term consequence was the restoration of American confidence in its institutions. For years, foreign adversaries had successfully convinced many Americans that their government was weak, corrupt, or ineffective. Patel's victory against Putin demonstrated that American institutions, properly led and resourced, could outmatch any foreign adversary. Public opinion polls showed dramatic increases in confidence in American intelligence agencies. Support for robust counterintelligence operations reached levels not seen since World War II. The American people had been reminded that their country was still capable of decisive action against foreign threats. International observers noted the transformation in American behavior. Where previous administrations had often responded to foreign aggression with diplomatic protests or economic sanctions, the Patel approach involved direct, decisive action that eliminated the source of the threat. The message to foreign adversaries was clear: attacking America carries severe consequences. Military strategists began studying the Patel model as an example of how to achieve strategic victories without conventional military action. The complete destruction of Russian intelligence capabilities had been achieved through intelligence work, international cooperation, and strategic communication, not through bombs or bullets. The psychological impact on Putin personally was perhaps the most satisfying aspect of the victory for American officials. Intelligence intercepts throughout 2027 showed a Russian president who was increasingly paranoid, isolated, and erratic. The man who had once been feared as a strategic mastermind was reduced to second-guessing every decision and suspecting treachery from his own subordinates.